City Administrator requests that that be pulled from this evening's meeting. Are there any other changes?
I'll move we approve the agenda
With that change?
with that change.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, then all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. The motion carries. Then on the consent agenda, are there any items you wish to discuss?
Mr. President, I'd like to talk about item I briefly.
Okay, before we do that, just on the minutes, I would note one correction, that the hospital administrator's last name is not Raymond. It is Ryman, R-E-Y-M-A-N. So I think we would deal with that item separately in terms of approval of the minutes. They'd need to be approved as corrected. So we can pull that out. Are there any other corrections to the minutes?
Are we even looking at typos or anything like that?
Well, if there's a typo in there.
There's two typos on, under Resolution 05-2011 and 06-2011. The words resolution is spelled wrong, and one of them in the word industries, and the second one is spelled.
Okay. So we've got three things on the minutes. Anything else? And then the chair would entertain a motion to approve the minutes with those three corrections.
So move.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have the motion second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, then we'll vote on that motion. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Lamblum?
Aye.
Mr. Olmans?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. And Mr. Jackson's requested that item I on the consent agenda, you'd like to discuss that, so we'll go ahead.
I have no question about this specific grant application, but it brings to my mind, are we submitting other grant applications right now to the Oil Impact Office?
Commissioner Jackson, I'm not aware of any other oil and gas grant applications at this time.
The thought occurs to me, and I realize we're looking at some new legislation and that office will be funded probably very differently than it is now, but we do have a list of infrastructure needs, and we are legitimately saying that many of those are oil impact related infrastructure needs. It seems to me that it might make sense to have some applications in. Even though the dollars are limited, we know our chances aren't very good. I think to get those projects on the docket, I think there's a number of them. I don't think it takes that much to do these applications. And it just seems to me to make sense that we get them in there, to get them on record, to make a point about what our needs are.
Commissioner Jackson, you're entirely correct about our needs. They range in the millions of dollars. So submitting an application for these grants, it is quite simple. It's generally a one-page application process, so doing so wouldn't take a lot of staff time.
I think we should err on the side of having them in there, sitting on the desk.
Related to that, House Bill 1013 is going to be taking testimony tomorrow morning, and that is the restructuring of the Very Impact program that we're discussing right now.
That was really my only comment.
Okay.
I'm fine with this application, of course.
You don't wish that it be acted on separately?
No.
Okay. Anything else on the consent agenda that commissioners wish to discuss?
Mr. President,
Yes.
just one matter, if I may, on item J is a resolution for surplus property. Just for your notes, since that is a resolution, it is titled Resolution 09-2011.
Okay. Anything else? Then the chair to entertain a motion to approve the Consent agenda,
I'll move to approve consent agenda items B through J, with the exception of E. I guess we
Okay.
removed E.
we did. So we have the motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Landblom?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. We'll move to the non-timetable agenda, and the first item we have there is a loan request from the Theodore Roosevelt Regional Airport. Mr. Kessel, are you introducing that item?
I certainly will, Commissioner Johnson, or excuse me, President Johnson. The Theodore Roosevelt Regional Airport has requested a loan in the amount of $250,000 so that they can complete upgrades in their parking. They have a circle, for lack of a better word, that they would like to fill in and double the amount of parking places that they currently offer. The exciting part about this is they did reach their 10,000 employment criteria, so they are eligible for additional funding. They would like to use that funding to pay for this project, but it becomes a timing issue. That funding isn't going to be available for about a year, and right now it's being funded, or that federal program is being funded via continuing resolutions. So if the commission approves of the loan, it would be up to $250,000 with an interest rate of 4%, which is the interest rate that we provided to the airport the last time that they approached the city for a loan and it was approved. And it would require that they pay the loan back within 18 months. That could be as early as one lump sum, depending on the status of those continuing resolutions, or it could be in 4 equal quarterly installments. But it would be a short-term loan for a maximum of $250,000 at 4% interest.
And I think you're assuming, or it's your recommendation, that the source of funds be the future fund if...
That'd be correct, President Johnson.
Okay. Well, you've heard Mr. Kessel's introduction. Any comments or questions here by commissioners?
Mr. President,
Mr. Lamblin?
is it possible that the federal funds could not be committed or could not be used for paying previous obligations? Is there any type of caveat?
Commissioner Landblum, I don't know that I can answer that in terms of the program itself that they work with under is a federally approved program. What they're debating at the federal level right now is the funding or level of funding. There's several agencies that are working under continuing resolutions, and generally those last a short period of time. So I would hate to venture a guess as to what the ultimate funding would be for that program. I suppose they could eliminate it.
There's been discussion about along that line for certain type of airports. The other thing is that they want to get into construction this summer, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
But these funds wouldn't be available to 2012, and I just wonder if there's any limitation that the federal government puts on reimbursing for projects like that.
I'm not aware of any limitations, Commissioner Landblum, that would prevent us from providing this loan. I do know that if the airport accepts funding from the city and then uses federal funds to pay that back, that they cannot charge for parking at the airport. If they chose not to pay back or use federal funds to complete this project, they could then charge for parking.
Other questions or comments?
Mr. President,
Mr. Jackson?
I will move that we approve the loan under the terms as presented.
I would second that. Think it's a good investment.
Does your motion and second include that the loan should be from the future fund?
That's what we're contemplating is the future fund.
We did this a few years ago.
Yes, I think so.
Loan money to the airport from the future fund. I forget just exactly what it was for now, but
That is correct, President Johnson. This model that we're presenting this evening is essentially a recreation of the terms that we did in the past. The future fund was the funding source for that loan as well.
Then I would include that in my motion.
I would include that in my second.
great. Any discussion now that we have the motion and the second?
Sitting on the Airport Authority Board as the liaison for the city, this point of discussion, or this is a major point of discussion at many of their meetings, and any type of way we can help and expand the parking situation out there, I think would be a real plus for the city of Dickinson.
Especially if you can do it without incurring any parking fees for the citizens by doing this program. I think that's really good.
Okay, other comments? Hearing none, then we'll vote on the motion. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Olman?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Landblum?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so the motion carries. All right, item B is pilot request for the Beyond Shelter. We do have a 5:30 timetable, so if this takes more than 5 minutes, we'll probably interrupt it and go to the timetable, just so everyone is aware. So, Mr. Kessel, do you have any introductory remarks?
I certainly can, President Johnson. The pilot or payment in lieu of taxes request is from Beyond Shelter. The request for a pilot to begin at a property tax value of $13,260 as opposed to the expected property tax value of $29,993. It would escalate at 2% a year and conclude in 20 years. That's the request made by Beyond Shelter. The city of Dickinson did provide a pilot to Metro Plains not long ago. It was a very similar project in terms of the total cost of around $6 million anticipated. Same or similar amount of units in that 36 to 38 area, and serving generally the same section of our public, that being low income. The city did provide a pilot to Metro Plains with a beginning amount of $16,000, and they did escalate that at 3% a year for 17 years. So the request for Beyond Shelter is similar, but not quite the same. Mr. Dan Madler is here representing Beyond Shelter and would like to further impart some knowledge regarding his request.
Thank you, Mr. Kessel. Mr. President, Commissioners, thank you for your time. Once again, for the record, my name is Dan Madler. I'm with Beyond Shelter Incorporated, a North Dakota nonprofit housing developer based in Fargo, North Dakota. And I'm here today to visit with you regarding partnering with you to help provide affordable housing to the community of Dickinson, North Dakota. As Mr. Kessel stated, there are actually 4 items that basically we're requesting from the Commission tonight. The main one is the payment in lieu of taxes, or the pilot. The pilot at $13,260 for a period of up to 20 years at 2% per year escalation. The other items are waiver of different fees that are related to constructing an affordable project. They are the building permit fees, the utility connection fees, and the tipping landfill fees. At the last meeting and even today, there was some questions as far as, the differences between a recently approved pilot and the requests that we're making. And I can only speak to the requests that we're making as far as the economics of the deal and how it works for the project we're putting together. Once again, Patterson Place Townhomes will be a 38-unit townhome-style affordable housing project located on the western edge of Dickinson. And basically, just to visit with you regarding possibly some potential differences regarding the Metro Plains deal and Beyond Shelter's project is, for one thing, as far as a nonprofit housing developer, a nonprofit basically is mission-driven. Beyond Shelter's mission is improving lives and creating communities by developing housing for those most in need. And right now, the most need here that we're seeing here in Dickinson is multifamily affordable housing. This is housing for your current family residents here in Dickinson. They're long-term residents. They've lived here in Dickinson for most of their lives. They're currently raising their families here. They're sending their families to schools. And essentially, they're being priced out of the local market. From a recent February 2011 market study that BSI commissioned in support of this project, the average rent right now for a two-bedroom unit is $1,025 per month. And often that does not include additional utilities that need to be paid by the tenant. An example would be heat, electricity, etc. Also from that recent market study, rents, right now what they're seeing in Dickinson is when our lease is up for renewal, those rents are being increased on average at 10% or more. And if the tenant does move out, that unit is going straight to market, thus creating extreme economic pressure on your existing residents that are families here in Dickinson that have lived here. So basically, it's pricing your long-term residents out of the market. As far as a nonprofit's development's goal, Beyond Shelter's goal in any of our projects that we put together are basically to provide the most affordable rents possible, while at the same time ensuring that the project is economically feasible. Typically, how we do that is we apply to several federal, state, and local funding programs, private foundations, and grants. And basically, the way we're competitive and are successful in that area is there is a recognized difference between a for-profit and nonprofit developer when we're applying for these foundation dollars. The best example that I have is the federal tax credits, which is the meat and potatoes and the funding source that we're relying on for this project. In the application itself, it does have a separate set aside for nonprofit developers that is separate than the general pool. And so basically, also when we're applying to foundation dollars, oftentimes for-profit developers don't have access to those resources. So essentially, Beyond Shelter as a nonprofit developer are able to apply for additional funds and resources that are recognized as there is a distinct difference between the for-profit and nonprofit. And we're pretty competitive, all in the hopes of basically providing the affordable rents, buying down the rents. Nonprofit developer also typically uses more of its own cash resources than a for-profit developer. On this project specifically, right now, the way that the numbers are looking, Beyond Shelter is committing approximately $400,000 plus to this project. A nonprofit developer also is able to create a synergistic relationship with the local housing authority. Our partner in this project is the Housing Authority of Stark County. And basically, we're partnering with them, working with them on their Housing Choice Voucher Program, and the Housing Authority of Stark County will also be the property manager.
Is now a good time for you to take a little break, maybe? And
Yes, Mr. President.
it was the first time I saw you take a breath, so...
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you for allowing me to interrupt you. It is past 5:30. We do have a timetable agenda item there. It's a public hearing regarding a rezoning petition. Mr. Soren, is there anything you want to say about it before we open the public hearing?
Yes, thank you, President Johnson. This is a rezoning request for State's Fifth, which is a subdivision that we approved at the last City Commission meeting. It is the continuation of the Roars development between 23rd Avenue West and the business loop. Currently, it is all zoned R1 low-density residential. Their request is to rezone Lot 1, Block 1, which is the block along the business loop from R1 to R3, and the remaining 3 blocks in the subdivision from R1 to R2. Planning and Zoning has reviewed that as part of the development of this plating process and is recommending approval.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction. We'll declare the public hearing open. Anyone that wishes to comment regarding this proposed ordinance may do so. Just step to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. Anybody wish to comment? No one wishes to comment. We'll declare the public hearing closed. I'd invite comments from city commissioners or other city staff.
Mr. President, Mr. Shorn, there's a sewer main easement that goes through Block 1, and I'm going to assume that there's no way that you allow building on top of that particular easement, is that right?
Yeah, there will be no building on top of that. That is, as you can see on that plat, it shows it continuing to the north. It is the most direct and really the only route we've been able to find to continue sewer service all the way up to the interstate. And the developer's aware of that and is working as we move north to ensure that we can continue that development of that sewer line as we go north.
And the city controls that through a building permit itself?
Controls,
That there would not be any occupancy on that easement?
yes, as we do with all utility easements, that when we issue a building permit, we ensure that we take that into consideration.
Thank you.
Other comments? Mr. Colling, is there an ordinance number on this one?
The ordinance 1408.
Okay. So tonight, we'd be considering first reading. If there are no other comments, is there a motion regarding first reading?
Mr. President,
Mr. Steiner,
move to approve the first reading of ordinance 1408.
is there a second?
I will second.
We have the motion, the second. Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Lamblum?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Olmans?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. So the motion carries. We'll back to Mr. Madler. Thank you for allowing the interruption.
Thank you, Mr. President, Commissioners. Okay, the pilot itself and the difference, the $16,000 versus the request of $13,260. Basically, just want to kind of break this down to basically a family situation and how I underwrote and how Beyond Shelter has underwritten this deal to date. Basically, the difference between the $16,000 and the $13,260 is $2,740. Basically, that difference ties to, within my current pro forma, I have approximately 11 two-bedroom units that I can absorb that additional cost. Meaning to make up for that $2,700, I'd have to raise my current rent schedule by $21 per month per unit, or approximately $250 on those 11 units. And when you look at the 11 units, average household size, or the maximum household size is four-person household in a two-bedroom. That's approximately 44 people. And so basically, you know, every dollar really does matter for this project. Also, basically, if I have to raise my rents, what that does, how I'm currently underwriting the deal, is it currently takes out one of my Section 8 project voucher households. My rent is no longer low enough to qualify for the housing choice voucher through the Stark County Housing Authority. And it permanently removes the other 10 units from ever being eligible because my rents would never be low enough to qualify for that program. And so basically, that's kind of how the difference in the dollar and cents wise kind of makes, and that's where we came with the request. Our whole goal was to provide as many units as we can that would be voucher eligible. And because of how we were competitive or need to be competitive applying for the tax credits, my rents on the other remaining units are pretty much set. I can't move them or change them. It's basically these 11 units that would be affected. And so the hope would be basically to keep these 11 units eligible for voucher holders. As the Housing Authority of Stark County commented on prior commission meeting, right now basically their program size has been reduced by well over 100 vouchers, and their housing and their spending budget authority that has been lost to the community of Dickinson is well over $300,000. And those are spending authorities that the city and the community and county of Stark County will never get back. So we'd like to preserve as many of those dollars and units as possible. The other offset would be basically to replace that. I need to raise an additional $32,000 in grants, federal resources, funds to replace that. I'm pretty much maxed out as far as my permanent construction, or my permanent operational loan. And basically, the only way to make up that gap on that $2,700 is to basically find another $32,000 somewhere else. And so that just isn't as easy as I would like it to be, but that's kind of the real case scenario as far as the differences between what we're asking for and what's been approved in the past. The last thing that I have regarding the pilot itself is to just remind you that, although Beyond Shelter is coming into the community to produce affordable housing, and we plan on being here for 30 years, this project is really for the community of Dickinson and the residents of Dickinson, and it is a Dickinson project. But the 20-year pilot basically allows us to guarantee and helps Beyond Shelter ensure that we can continue to provide these affordable rents for that period of 20, 30 years. The other items that I asked for are kind of a standard set of items: the waiver of the fees, the building permit fees, the utility connection fees, and the tipping fees. And it kind of ties to some of the other sources that we're applying for. Just to kind of give a recap, we have applied for tax credits administered through the North Dakota Housing Finance Agency, and if successful, that resource will generate approximately $4.9 million of equity to this project. The project right now is estimated at about $7.5 million in total. That's total development costs, not just construction, but total development costs. And so basically, I'll have approximately 60 to 65% of the cost paid through equity. I'll then have a first mortgage on the project, which will cover another 18%. So I have to fill and or find a gap of about 17%. And right now, I have applied for, in the past week, $450,000 in other federal and local sources. In the next month and a half, I'll be applying for another $300,000 in private foundation and other private and local dollars. And basically, the story to be told is, when you're applying for these resources, the resources are precious. Everybody's asking, well, what is the local community doing? And by granting the pilot, which is the biggest item on the checklist, and in addition, the waiver of the fees, and I realize that there are hard costs tied to the waiver of the fees, it helps tell the story, and it helps show that the community is stepping up to the plate and participating in a partnership role. And basically, I guess I can't basically write a grant request that says that, as well as you guys are coming to the table with your checkbook. That's the information that I have, and I'm open to any questions that you may have regarding the project and or the request. And I appreciate the consideration.
Okay, thank you. Comments or questions?
I have a couple of questions.
Mr. Jackson.
Mr. Madler, help us understand. I assume that the funding sources, the agencies who have oversight with those funding sources, probably have design standards, construction standards that you need to adhere to. Is that true, or?
Design standards, construction standards, usually it's code-driven. Whatever the code has been adopted by the City of Dickinson, Community of Dickinson, would be basically the minimum standards. We hire an architectural firm, EAPC Architects out of Fargo is the architect on this project. They have designed several affordable housing projects. I guess as far as the quality goes, we build the best that we can. We're not the top of the line, we're not the bottom. We like to try to fall in the middle. The units themselves are basically townhome style or row home style. And so basically that's better and a more productive, efficient unit for, I guess, a home, a family home, a rental unit, having that private entry, that private little area. It's a two-story. It just fits the family in the long-term viability of the project. And so yes, there are quality standards that we have a best practices of minimums that we do follow and try to incorporate and try to build the most quality product that we can. And I believe there are some photos of some previous projects that we have produced that would be similar that I could share with the commission if necessary regarding that.
Same question with your tenant profile. credit checks, background checks, that kind of thing? Are the requirements that way?
Definitely, we'll be partnering with the Housing Authority of Stark County, that basically, we do have resident selection criteria. Basically, especially with the voucher program, but also with just our tenants, basically, there's a background check for crime. Basically, as far as the financial piece of it, there is some room to move with as far as where they're at financially, because there are a lot of financial situations that a person needs to account. That's the reason they need the housing. And Blake could probably talk to more about that than I could, but there is a set of residential selection criteria that we basically follow, and because our whole goal is, this is our asset as well. We want to manage it, keep it well, and keep it basically a part of the community that you can be proud of when you drive by. It's respectable, it looks good, it's clean, it's mowed, it's taken care of.
What I'm leading to, it will ultimately be the housing authority that will have responsibility to oversee that part of the project?
The housing authority will be the property manager, and then we'll be their, say, their boss. And so basically, when we do a development like this, and we bring investment dollars, private investment dollars, there's a high standard that we need to basically follow, because to protect the investor's investment. And so basically, that project is reviewed probably 3 or 4 times annually by not only the investor, but the state and several other funding agencies that we'll have applied for. So it gets scrutinized a lot. And so there will be, the standards there are in place to ensure that the project is successful for not only the first 10 years, the 15 years, but the full 30 years.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Mr. Steiner.
I have 2 questions, one for Mr. Madler and one for Mr. Kessel. The first one is the property maintenance, the mowing and the snow removal and everything, will that be up to the individual that's renting the apartments, or will
No,
that be-
it'll be the property itself will
There'll be
take
a
care of
property
that.
manager that will take care of that?
Correct.
Okay. The second one, Mr. Kessel, in your summary here, you said it would be your recommendation to deny the waiver of the building permit and the utility connection fees. Do we have a total of what those would be?
Commissioner Steiner, we have made an estimate of what those will be. Until we actually get an application for a building permit, we won't be able to give you a precise number. But our estimate is about $18,000 for building permit fees. As Mr. Madler said, those do require staff to go out and perform multiple inspections on site, and so it is a hard cost to us. And in terms of utility connection fees, we're not exactly sure of the design of the building, but if there are individual hookups, that would require 38 different water meters and such. That's a cost to us of about $41,000, $41,500. So again, a hard cost fee that we'd have to expend, and we collect that or remediate that fee through the use of the utility connections.
And the tipping landfill fees are something that we can absorb without much cost?
Commissioner Steiner, the current estimate, and again, it depends upon the construction and such, is about $1,500 for tipping fees. I think that is something we can absorb much easier than the prior two.
Thank you.
And if I may add regarding the building plan, currently, the way we have it set up, just this goes to the water meter and the hookup. I'm assuming it'll probably be 7, 1 per building and 1 for, well, maybe 8, 1 for the building, for each building, 1 for the sprinkler system, and then 1 for the fire sprinkler system that has to be built in. Each unit will have to have its own sprinkler system, so approximately 8, just as an FYI.
That would then lower the estimated cost of the utility connection fees then.
Do you have a ballpark on how much that impacts it?
Probably they're about $1,100 per unit. So if there's only 8 of them, you're probably talking about $9,000, Commissioner Altman.
Okay. Versus 41 for...
Correct. That was based upon each unit having their own
Yep.
service.
So that's good news for you in a way.
Definitely.
So, Mr. Colling, the question for you then is, we would, if we're in favor of doing this, we would use the resolution that is in our binder, except we would have to fill in the actual amounts of the pilot itself. Is that
That's correct. There is another step that is required by North Dakota Century Code, and that is a pilot of this nature does require that the applicant advertise notice to competitors that the pilot is being requested. That's the notice requirement is a publication once a week for 2 weeks, and then 15 days after publication is completed, the commission can act on the pilot request itself. So I think what we may be looking from the commission tonight is to get an idea of what the commission may be willing to agree to, and then we would fill in the numbers and allow that publication and notice to be made.
Okay, so there really isn't any action on our part tonight. Well, there could be, I suppose, in terms of the waiver of the fees. Could we act on that?
You could act on the waiver of the fees, that's correct, but the resolution would require
Okay.
some work.
Well, I'll jump in here. I don't have a problem with the base amount for 2012 and the 2% increase in the 20 years. I'm okay with that. The fees sound a little less ominous now, but what if we just met halfway and we waived half the fee? And it sounds like if there's only 8 or 9 meters here, we're dealing with something quite a bit less, but I would just throw that out as a suggestion.
What did we do on the for-profit? Did they just do the pilot program and none of the waiving of the fees, right?
Yeah, Commissioner Altman, they didn't request any permit fee waivers, so they paid their full amount.
Okay.
And if I may, President Johnson, just to clarify, when you say half, do you mean half of the utilities or half of the building as well, building permit fees?
I meant half of all three of these. Yes. But that's, just suggestion, and usually about 3/4 of my ideas are bad ideas. So,
So if I do the math and add those three up, it was about 28,500 ballpark-ish, and so you're suggesting 14,250-ish.
whatever they turn out to be,
Right.
we would waive half, and they would pay the other half. So it looks like, if your math is right, we're dealing with less than $15,000.
What does that do in the greater scheme of things for your project?
Oh, it definitely helps. Basically, I need to tell the story to fill that gap. As far as, the overall project costs and stuff, it definitely contributes and helps.
Well, Mr. Kessel showed me some numbers prior to the meeting, and if I remember the numbers right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but by doing the pilot, it saves you $480-some thousand in property taxes.
It's huge. The pilot is huge, President.
And if we throw in roughly $15,000, that gets you up to about $500,000, and that was the tax break for Metro Plains. Is that correct? They were, in round numbers, they were about $500,000.
They paid about $500,000. Their tax break would have been about $305,000.
So they had a tax break of $305.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the 500,000 is obviously a compelling number for you to tell your supporters and the support that the community's giving you and how we're standing behind your project as well.
Most definitely. That pilot is huge, and that amount, when you take a look at it over a period of 20 years, is significant. When I'm visiting with people, it's like getting this thing built is always easier than operating it, and operating it at affordable rents for the whole period of 30 years. And that pilot is huge for the operational phase of the project. It will ensure the affordability of this project for the next 20, 30 years.
So if you left here with about a $500,000 commitment, you'd feel like it was a good day and everything went how you
Awesome
wanted
day.
it to be?
It's an awesome day.
All right.
Mr. Kessel?
President Johnson, Mr. Madler, obviously, affordable housing is a big issue in Dickinson right now, and this project is going to go a long way to help. One of the most compelling things that I find about the project is the retaining of the voucher program. And I think it's important that people understand that it isn't that the voucher program isn't able to be used. It's, the reason that's not being used is that the landlords simply aren't accepting the vouchers, and you would.
Definitely. Basically, the biggest thing regarding the voucher is the rent limit. And basically, right now, private landlords, because a voucher is basically a piece of paper that a successful applicant or household has that allows them to go out in the private market to find a unit to rent that meets certain housing quality standards and basically rental standards. And if the rents being charged locally or by private landlords are greater than the amount allowed, basically it's just can't be used. I understand from visiting with Blake, last year the Housing Authority issued 96 vouchers in 2010, and not one of them got placed in the community.
And to further that, then my question is, can you talk a little bit about the relationship of the voucher program and the 30-year commitment that you're making and the 20-year pilot then that the commission may make as well?
Sure. The voucher program itself, right now I have approximately 15 units that would qualify for a voucher at my rent levels. With this pilot, that would bring in possibly up to another 11. And so well over half of my units would be eligible or be able to, my rents would be set at a level to accept the voucher based off of what the Housing Authority has proposed to do regarding its payment standards, which is its rent limits as they look today. And we'll continue to basically work with that. Our rent schedule, basically, the way it operates is a 2% rent increase per year on how the performer runs. And so basically, we'll need to basically stay ahead of our expenses, but the long-term goal would be to continue to keep those units eligible for the program in the long term.
Other comments or questions? I'll just ask the commissioners, is there anyone here who right now would oppose the pilot portion of this based upon what you know today?
No.
Okay, so does that give you enough indication of how we feel about the pilot? And then, Mr. Colling, we could go ahead then and act on the waiver request on the fees?
Yes, you may.
Okay. And we don't have to do anything else on the pilot?
No, we'll have a pilot resolution with all the numbers implemented in there next time around, and coordinate with Mr. Madler on making sure the notice gets published as well.
Okay. All right. Well, is there a motion regarding the fees?
Mr. President, I'll move that hookup fees, building permit fees, and landfill fees be reduced by 50% for the Patterson Place Townhomes project.
I would second that.
We have the motion, the second. Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Ullman?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Lamblum?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so the motion carries.
Mr. President, one more
Mr.
question, Mr.
President.
Madler, and this has nothing to do with what we talked about here. Are you originally from New England?
Correct. My parents
Well,
are
you got a
David
better
Cameron.
chance of getting approved now.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner Steiner. Yes, I am originally from New England, North Dakota.
Where are you from, Mr. Steiner?
Well, it used to be New England, but
New
that
England.
that would have nothing to do with my...
Okay.
You can be had, though.
We good? Mr.
We're good.
President, Commissioners, I appreciate your
Yeah.
help and support of this project, and thank you for your time this evening.
And thank you for bringing this project to us, too.
I guess you probably told us, but hopefully, when would you get started on this if everything falls into place?
Best case scenario, if we're able to line up financing, we'll be closing the financing in August and starting construction in September for construction completion in August of 2012.
Okay.
And our market study says we should have no problem leasing this thing up before the end of the year, if not on the day we open our doors.
All right, thank you.
Is there any reason that you couldn't hit that August date?
The August date is just a matter of of things coming into play. We're still going to be aggressively applying for additional resources through private foundations, some federal dollars, et cetera, and basically this will go a long way when we apply for that to tell the story. But basically, what we typically see is we apply for the credits in February and get additional financing set up. We hear about the credits around April, and we usually close in August and start construction in the fall. And that's what we've done for majority, if not all, of our 19 projects to date.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for your patience.
Thanks again, Mr. President and Commissioners.
Okay, that brings us to item C, North Side annexation. We talked about this at the previous meeting, but Mr. Colling, we'd ask you to make a brief introduction on this again.
Yes, Mr. President, Commissioners, as you are all well aware, the city's annexation of properties on the north end of Dickinson was completed. There is litigation that has been filed regarding that annexation, and the resolution before you addresses some ambiguity with respect to the pending litigation. We have a hearing on a landowner's motion for an injunction that is scheduled for first week in April. We remain confident that our annexation procedure was compliant with North Dakota Century Code, and we believe we'll be successful at that injunction hearing. However, we do have an issue with developers who are currently making plans to develop their properties in that area, and they are developing on the expectation and assumption that they are going to be annexed into city limits and have city services available to them. The problem with that is, as long as the litigation remains pending, there is the potential for the landowners to drag out the process. It may take up to a year before a case will go to trial, and there is always the potential for an appeal after that. So as long as that litigation is hanging out there, there is some potential lingering ambiguity with respect to the status of the property. And it is for that reason that the resolution here is before you. This resolution is an annexation resolution that describes the exact same property as was annexed last fall. And if you do approve the resolution, we would go about the process of asking for written objections to that annexation, and assuming less than 25% of the landowners object to the annexation, would record this annexation resolution on the property records as well, making sure that the property is annexed and we can proceed with development of those properties in city limits, even despite the pending annexation lawsuit that is ongoing. Be happy to try to address any questions you might have.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Colling?
I have one. If we go through with this resolution and we don't get the objection, so it passes through, what's to prevent this one from going to, how do you stop the circle?
It's a good question. One of the things that's always been true about the lawsuit that's been filed is the landowners have not made the claim that the city doesn't have the power to annex the property. Instead, what they have done is identify a couple of what they claim are procedural errors in the way the city went about annexing the property. And those errors are not things that we believe defeat the annexation. The Supreme Court and state statutes are very clear that exact compliance with the statutes is not required, that what the annexation statutes are trying to do is provide a forum for landowners to have notice of the annexation. And that's why we believe will prevail in the annexation lawsuit that's going on. This resolution, if you approve this, we'll have the process making sure that we clear up any of those procedural errors that the landowners have alleged in the first annexation process. So we intend this to be a somewhat cleaner process.
Okay.
Other comments or questions? It's resolution number 10-2011. Is there a motion regarding this item?
Mr. President,
Mr.
move to
Stein?
approve resolution number 10-2011.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have the motion, second. Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Landblum?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. Brings us to item D. This is an ordinance, be first reading regarding the zoning of adult businesses. And Mr. Colling, can you introduce this item also?
I can, thank you, Mr. President. The proposed ordinance before you is a revision of Chapter 3 of our existing city ordinances. Chapter 3 is regulatory ordinance of adult businesses, adult establishments, and this ordinance attempts to update existing city code and make a city code somewhat more restrictive of adult businesses than what we currently have in city ordinance. Specifically, this ordinance would limit any adult establishment or adult business to industrial areas of town and mandate that they be at least 1,200 feet from any school or residence or church or hospital or from the downtown commercial area. So there are other more restrictive elements in the code that regulate exactly what such adult establishments could do and the sorts of performances and materials that they could show. Be happy to entertain any questions you might have on the ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Colling. Do commissioners have any questions here?
Yeah, Mr. President,
Mr. Lamblum?
when looking at the definitions, you talk about a adult cabaret, and then we go to item N8, and under the sign there, on the signage there, do those particular, does that item subsection 8 conflict with the definition in what's allowable in a cabaret? It says not permitted to appear nude or semi-nude, but then a cabaret is defined, provides for some of that exposition where you do remove clothing or remove, I just wonder if that would become a conflicting or a conflicting statement there.
Commissioner Landrum, it's not a conflict. The definition section simply defines what the adult cabaret or an establishment of that sort would involve. The actual restrictions on those sorts of businesses or establishments appear in subsection N and include the restriction that you referenced there,
Okay.
including the sign.
And then we have two, I'm going to say typos on subsection 8 for number 2 and 4 where it says no permitted. It should
Yeah,
be not.
I caught that. We'll correct that on.
Okay, and
I saw a reference to city auditor twice, which I think you now mean to have city administrator.
We could change that. I believe that was an existing city ordinance. There's a provision of our code that states any references to city auditor are read to apply to the city administrator, but we can clean that up as well.
Okay. As I read this, any establishment that was compliant with this code would not be able to sell or distribute alcohol.
That is correct, Mr. President. It specifically provides that an adult business or an adult establishment would not be eligible for a liquor license, not be permitted to allow the consumption of alcohol on the licensed premises.
and for the public, these would be designated in a particular zoning district?
Yes, Commissioner Landblum, they are restricted to industrial zones.
Does it impact any current businesses, the alterations that we make to the amendment?
It's possible that it may alter conditions on some existing businesses. We don't have anything in town at this point that would qualify as an adult cabaret. We do have businesses that may qualify as adult bookstores, and some of these regulations will apply to those stores as well.
So would it force a relocation, or?
I don't believe it will force a relocation. It may force them to adjust some of the people that they let into the business, or register. They have registration requirements with police and a license fee that they need to pay, which I believe the city has not enforced for some period of time now.
What's the ordinance number for this one?
Mr. President, this would be ordinance 1409.
Well, it's been our practice on both first and second reading to ask if there's anyone from the public that wishes to comment regarding this ordinance, and we'll do that now. If there's someone from the public that would like to comment, they can step to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. If no one from the public, then we'll just continue with our discussion. So, is there any more comments or questions by commissioners?
Mr. President,
Mr. Steiner.
Mr. Kessel or council, either one of you can answer this question. To me, I think we probably have one, correct me if I'm not mistaken, one adult bookstore in town. Is that correct? We have none of the others. Okay? And we do not have an ordinance in place now for the adult bookstore.
The ordinance that we have in Chapter 3 does cover adult bookstores currently.
But this is a complete new one?
In the material in your packet, the underlined material is new material. Everything else is in existing city code.
Okay. My question is, my comment is, why do we even have to allow it within city limits?
That's a good question. I appreciate the question. It comes down to an interpretation that the United States Supreme Court has given us with respect to First Amendment rights. And rightly or wrongly, for better or worse, the Supreme Court has said that there is some limited First Amendment free expression right to engage in this sort of adult conduct, adult establishment conduct. So there is a First Amendment right there, but it is a limited right, and it can be limited as we are doing in code here. The restrictions that you see on adult businesses in this ordinance are, for the most part, specifically taken from Supreme Court cases that have addressed the very issue that we have here.
Aren't they drawing the fine line when we ask for 1,200 or city limits? I mean,
there are a lot of extremely fine lines that are drawn in these cases in determining what is obscenity, which is not protected by the First Amendment, and what is non-obscene and is protected by the First Amendment. 1,200 feet is something that the Supreme Court has given us as a reasonable regulation of adult establishments, but you can certainly do something less than that or different than that if you wish.
personally, I could see us grandfathering in the bookstore that's here, and not even bringing in this ordinance here that we have here, or specific ordinance that says not within the city limits. If the county wants to deal in another manner, I would.
I think if I understood Mr. Colling's comment to your question, that we don't have the authority to restrict it from being within the city limits. We can regulate it, but we can't say no to the city limits.
That's correct. That's the general rule that the Supreme Court has given us, that cities may restrict but cannot prohibit non-obscene activities.
And so we're just trying to be proactive and have this on our books and cleaned up before we're presented with a what if or can we.
Commissioner Ullman, I think that's correct. That's the intent here. And one of the dangers that I think we run if the city would prohibit adult businesses entirely, somebody could come in and try to establish a business and challenge our zoning code as being not compliant with Supreme Court case law by prohibiting these sorts of businesses entirely. Based on what the Supreme Court has said to date, that's probably going to be a successful lawsuit if it's a complete prohibition. So this ordinance attempts to give, I think, that the maximum regulation possible as the Supreme Court has given it to us.
Mr. President,
Mr.
I
Jackson.
think the other thing that we need to make clear, though, here for our residents is that not only we're controlling this, but this ordinance really discourages any establishment like this. No alcohol on the premises, the zoning restrictions, and numerous other things that are in here that are, doesn't mean we still can't have something, but it's going to really discourage it.
Mr. President, Mr. Colin, does this have any application in the extraterritorial areas?
Not in the extraterritorial zone, no. This is not a zoning ordinance. Will just apply within city limits.
Mr. President?
Mr. Steiner.
Mr. Colling, if we approve this ordinance, then it would be under the understanding or in the ordinance that any licensee applicant still has to be approved by the board. Is that correct?
That's correct. They would have to come and present an application for a business of this type that you would have the ability to approve or reject.
Thank you.
And right now, the way it's written, we don't have as much authority to approve or deny. And so again, this is the proactive approach to be armed and ready for when that does happen.
That's correct.
I see that we slipped in the number of $2,000 for a permit. I was just wondering if that cannot help be raised as a controlling interest on behalf of the city, that to establish a higher level, a minimum level like we've done with the liquor situation.
Yes, Commissioner Lamb-Bloom, that amount can be set at whatever amount you would choose. The $2,000 is actually something that exists in current ordinance. By current ordinance, businesses that qualify under as an adult establishment of this sort should be paying a $2,000 annual fee to the city in order to operate. That is not something that the city has enforced in the last several years, but it is something that we intend to enforce and apply in the future.
It is the, excuse me, Commissioners, it is the intention to take that $2,000 and the fee and adjust it annually per the fee resolution that you approve each and every year. So you'll have multiple opportunities to adjust that fee if you deem it fit.
And where do the proceeds from that fee, where are they earmarked for? Where do they go?
It's a general revenue, Commissioner Altman, so it would go right back into the general fund.
Okay.
Other comments?
Just a comment. I don't think the $2,000 fee is sufficient. I'd be more comfortable with a $5,000 fee.
Mr. Steiner, we do have an issue here in that, as Mr. Colling and Mr. Kessel have said, when they started to work on this ordinance and discovered the $2,000 fee, and they also then discovered that we do have one business in the community that this hasn't been assessed to.
Has not been?
Has not been.
Has not been assessed.
And apparently for a lot of years. I don't know if you traced it all the way back, but for whatever reason, this has not been done. So there is a business in the community that's going to be faced with a license fee that they're not accustomed to paying. Personally, I would think the $5,000 would be too big of a shock to start with. I don't think the fee amount is the major factor here. I think, as Mr. Jackson has pointed out, the zoning that we've would be authorizing this type of business to be located in, and the fact that it's non-alcohol is really a huge discouragement. I think they're much bigger factors than whether this is $1,000, $2,000, or $5,000, I think.
We can adjust the fees annually.
You
upon
can
review
adjust
anyway.
them with our fee resolution, but I think, we, as far as I'm aware, we haven't had an issue with the bookstore, and I think this will be quite a shock to them to begin with. I'd hate to make it even larger.
Okay.
Myself, but. Any other comments? Okay, well, this is ordinance 1409. Is there a motion regarding the first reading?
1409.
1409.
Okay. Mr. President, I'll move for passage of first reading of ordinance 1409.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote then. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Landblum?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so the motion carries. We go to item E, load restrictions. Mr. Colling, are you introducing that? This is also an ordinance?
Yes, Mr. President. This ordinance is a amendment to our existing code with respect to truck weight limits. This was a change that was requested by the police department as they are working out the details on enforcing the ordinance and putting their officers to work and enforcing truck limits. It would change the truck weight limit from 5 tons to a gross vehicle weighting rate of 26,001 pounds. That is something that is consistent with the way that the North Dakota Department of Transportation enforces weight limits on trucks throughout the state. The other change that is made here is to the penalty part of the ordinance, which allows for the ordinance, violation of the ordinance to be prosecuted as a Class B misdemeanor in the event that someone would not stop for a police officer or resist the police officer as he goes about his duty. Be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you for that introduction, Mr. Colling. Any comments or questions here?
Mr. Shorn, do our streets, are our streets able to handle 13 tons?
Well, I think in a general rule of thumb, yes, they can. Part of the, and maybe Mr. Dossinger can answer that better, but part of the truck regulations as a registered vehicle is the 26,001 pounds, as I understand it. Otherwise, under the 5 tons, we'd probably be touching most commercial or regular pickups and things of that nature as well, not just the oversized trucks.
That's correct, Mr. President, members of the commission. The way the ordinance was originally was stated dealt with the registered gross weight of 5 tons. So that means your typical half-ton pickup, your 1 tons, and your 3/4-ton pickups. The way it works is you purchase a motor vehicle, they take that gross weight and they double it, and that's how they come up with the registered gross weight of the vehicle. So any typical pickup running on the streets would be in violation of that ordinance. The reason we went with the 26,001 pounds deals with if you operate a motor vehicle in excess of 26,001 pounds, you have to have a commercial driver's license to operate that vehicle. And we've been working closely with the North Dakota Highway Patrol
with this ordinance. We want to make sure before we actively go out there and enforce it, we want to make sure that we have our ducks in a row. And that was one weight limit that they recommended to us, was the 26,001 pounds.
And we established fines in another section, right? As far as,
Yes, Commissioner Oltman, the ordinance before you just references the sections that we are changing with respect to what you initially adopted last
Yeah.
fall.
okay.
And we wanted the North Dakota Century Code 391221 added in case we ran across a driver of a motor vehicle, of a truck that refused to allow us to weigh his truck or refused to unload the excess load, so we have some type of enforcement action.
Does this apply to cabinet trucks too?
Depends how heavy it is.
It depends, okay. All right. Any other comments or questions? Is there anybody from the public that wishes to comment regarding this ordinance? No one from the public, other than comments by staff or commissioners? Not, is there a motion regarding first read? I'm assuming this is 1410?
Correct.
Okay, ordinance 1410.
I would make the motion to approve first reading of ordinance 1410.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion, the second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Oltman?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Lamblum?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. Well, we'll go to tab 5, public safety, but that's also an ordinance, so is Mr. Colling introducing this one, or is Chief Seevock going to introduce it?
Mr. President, I believe Chief Seevock has done the legwork on the revisions to this ordinance, so I'll let him introduce it.
President Johnson, Commissioners, the main body of Chapter 13 that's being changed is to update it to address current code and a lot of items that are now in the International Fire Code, when the city adopts the International Fire Code, that were listed separately before. As a point of clarification, however, and Attorney Colling, I had mentioned to you or emailed to you a couple of errors. Okay. Under I, Section 307.4.3, portable outdoor fireplaces, in the information you have, it states is deleted in its entirety. That's not the case. We just want the exception to that section deleted. So that would be a change. And under N, where it lists the appendices are not a part of Chapter 33. They're appendices to the code in general. So there should be a clarification there that the appendices actually aren't part of Chapter 33. They're part of the entire code. Mr. Colling, is there any other changes that we need to do with that? Okay. A portion of this also includes the adoption of the 2009 International Fire Code, updating the wording to accept that. And at this point in time, we're presenting the adoption of the fire code to you with amendments that would allow the sale of fireworks within corporate city limits. We've presented it to you this way because of a question asked by elements of the business community as to whether that would be possible or not. At this time, coincidentally, with the adoption of the fire code, something like that is in fact possible. And it brings a business like that, or it brings an opportunity like that into the regulation of the fire code versus creating a separate ordinance that would have to deal with it. So the provisions that are in front of you do have that amendment that would allow for the retail sale of fireworks within corporate city limits. The use of fireworks within corporate city limits would still be banned, however. That's all I have on the Chapter 13, unless you have questions.
Okay. Thank you, Chief Seevock. Questions or comments regarding this proposed ordinance?
Mr. President, Mr. Seevock, on the Section 108, Board of Appeals is deleted in its entirety in the original, but yet we go to another section, 13.08.030 on appeals, it alludes to the Board of Appeals. Is there a Board of Appeals within the system under the new code, or is there not?
We delete the Board of Appeals out of the wording of the fire code because we recognize and use the standing Board of Appeals already in existence with the city of Dickinson.
So there is a Board of Appeals in place already?
The Board of Appeals process is in place through the existing standing Board of Appeals.
I have another item right above that in subsection E, section 105. You're saying that you need an operational permit. They have candles or flames in dining rooms?
The operational permit that is being referred to in our case is the fire inspection form. Open flames in restaurants, as an example, need to be within a chimney. They can't be just open, can't be a candelabra on the table. And through our fire inspection process, when an establishment receives that fire inspection form from us, that is recognized as the operational permit. If they would be in violation of that aspect of the code, it would be noted on there, along with what changes they need to make.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I have a question, I guess, on that section I and J with the portable outdoor fireplaces. You're striking them from here, but they're still allowable within your fire code. Is that?
Yes,
how
the
that
reason
works?
those particular sections are being stricken is because of distance requirements that are different than what we have put forth within our city regulations.
Mhm.
And so we strike the areas of those that would be in conflict with that.
Okay. And then under the fee section, if we allow for retail sale of fireworks, obviously that fee is something that we're able to revisit and determine.
That's correct, Commissioner Altman. That would be something that would be established through the fee schedule through a resolution.
Okay.
Anything else? Is there anybody from the public that would like to comment regarding this ordinance? No, okay. And this is 1411?
Correct?
I'm on a roll. Okay. Is there a motion regarding this ordinance?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the first reading of ordinance number 1411.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
We have the motion, the second. Further discussion? Hearing none, then we'll vote. Mr. Lamblum?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Olmans?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Mr. Sevak, do you want to continue?
Thank you, President Johnson, Commissioners. I'd like to present tonight the 2010 Annual Report of Activities of the Dickinson Fire Department. Our mission is to provide quality fire services through community partnerships and education while investing in the betterment of our members. Our members are currently made up of 39 firefighters, which includes the 4 full-time staff. In addition, we have 2 chaplains and 5 reserve firefighters. The commitment of our members to the department and to the community is reflected in the years of service. You can see that the largest chunk right now is less than 5 years of service, 5 years or less, 41%, 30%, 16 and over. And as you're looking at those percentages, just to put some numbers to those for you, 0 to 5 years of service, 16 firefighters, 6 to 10 years, 9, 11 to 15 years, 2 firefighters, 16 to 30 years, 10, and over 30 years, 2. Another aspect of the commitment that these members show is in their training, broken down by category, which is reflected by this graph. Essentials is basic firemanship. That's ventilation of a building. That's advancing a hose stream. That's attacking the fire. That's all of those elements of training. Hazardous materials and weapons of mass destruction, 30 hours is next. Probation training is the initial training any new members receive when they first come in. The regular monthly trainings, again, encompass apparatus operations, truck evolutions, things like that. Special training, we'll talk about a little bit on the next slide. As you see, that's the highest category we have. The fire schools is the state fire school and regional fire schools that are attended by our members. TRT stands for Technical Rescue Training. Technical Rescue Team is high angle and confined space rescue, rope rescue, etc. They meet at least once a month to conduct their trainings. The special trainings category includes the CPR and first aid that was taught to fire department members and city employees. Fire inspection principles, which was at the National Fire Academy, 80 hours of training attended by Mark Selly, our fire inspector. Fire investigations was at the North Dakota Arson Seminar, 20 hours by full-time staff. That was fire prevention specialist Barrows and myself. Sprinkler systems, North Dakota Fire Prevention Seminar, 18 hours by full-time staff. And the other is 43 hours that includes webcasts on building construction, the National Emergency Management System, Incident Command, etc. Fire prevention and public education is an extremely important component of the services provided by our department. Due to the growth of the city, it's very important that our fire inspection program, our fire prevention program, I should say, continues to play a major role in preventing fires and saving lives. The efforts put forth in public education and prevention will help us maintain a volunteer fire department as a viable option in a rapidly growing community. In 2010, we conducted 1,582 total inspections broken down under the categories that you see. Approximately 1,207 total inspection locations exist in the community. That's an approximation. To the best of our figures, we're guessing, quite honestly, that there was 40 more locations in 2010 to inspect than there was in 2009. Routine inspections, of course, make up the brunt of our inspections, followed by follow-ups. Walk-through, drive-through, that could be the walk-through of a craft show at a mall or the drive-through of a mobile home court. Gas leaks are found on routine inspections. They're part of this, how we capture this data, however. Child care inspections, 44 child care inspections in 2010, 85 construction inspections, 33 complaints, and 27 alarm sprinkler tests. And even though we've prioritized our inspections, you can see the inspection count is fairly consistent from year to year from 2007 through 2010, however. 2006 we were a bit on the low side as we reorganized our department. The time spent on the inspection process has increased over 35% from 2008 to 2010. The increase can be contributed to time spent on construction inspections, which includes plan reviews and code interpretations. In our 2009 annual report, we mentioned the concern of not being able to complete all of our location inspections within a 12-month period of time. And again, even though we have prioritized our inspections, recognizing our target hazards, the buildings that we must get into on a yearly basis, on a 12-month basis, even though we've done that, I unfortunately have to report to you that we are now 23 months out on routine inspections in some areas of the city. Now keep in mind that our fire prevention personnel are also actively involved in the delivery of our fire department training program, emergency response, and the maintenance of our equipment, in addition to their fire prevention and inspection duties. Under fire prevention, we look at this as two categories, the inspections that we talked about and then the public education. Public education component runs all year long with peak activities in October, which is the month of Fire Prevention Week. Fire and life safety lesson plans are presented to elementary and high school and university students, as well as assisting area businesses with emergency plans and fire extinguisher training. This year was especially busy for our fire prevention staff. 103 lectures, 46 demonstrations, 27 fire drills, including the college campus drills, 48 tours of the station, And by year end, this varies a little bit from the information you have in your packet, by year end, we had spoken to well over 1,300 students. This map represents 2009 service calls, and 218. And I want to just use it as a reference. As the Central Fire Station is located somewhere in that shaky dot right there, NFPA guidelines give us standards to look at, not mandates, but suggestions and standards that we can use as benchmarks, if you will. And one of those being travel distance from the Central Fire Station for an engine company. The recommended travel distance for an engine company shouldn't exceed 1.5 miles. That's represented by this first area of shading. Recommended travel distance for an aerial, for a ladder truck, shouldn't exceed 2.5 miles. And that's represented by this area. Again, depending on the community and depending on what's going on in the community, those are just recommendations. 1.5 miles may be excessive, or 1.5 miles may be more than enough, or 2.5 miles, depending on what you're looking at. But the next slide will show you, you can see that, if you could see it a little bit clearer, this is all the, whether it's an actual fire or whether it's a call. You can see in 2009 how it was grouped as compared to 2010. We had 22 more calls for service in 2010 than we did in 2009. We had a bit more activity up in this area. Data like this is what we're going to be bringing back to you as we talk about and explore the best location for a substation in Dickinson's future. This is the type of data that we'll be looking at to help us determine that. We know that there's development taking place up here, there's development taking place over here, and of course state addition. And it's not that things aren't happening out here. You can see in 2010, we did have more calls up in this area, however. Our response structure is a multi-level type of response. We don't send everybody and everything to every call. I'm going to figure this controller out yet. Our first level of response is full-time personnel or the officer in charge, one individual in other words. Depending on the type of call received by dispatch, that individual decides on whether they'll handle it alone in an investigative type role or whether they need additional resources. The next level of resources for them could be the night duty program. That's 2 firefighters and 1 truck, 1 engine. From 9:30 at night to 6:30 every morning, there's at least 2 firefighters that spend the night at the fire station. The next level of response, if it exceeds night duty or if it happens during the time of day when night duty isn't on duty yet, would be the alert crew. That's approximately 6 to 8 of our firefighters, an engine, and our rescue truck. And that rotates, those people that make up that alert crew changes on a weekly basis, and that rotates through all the members of the department, so they all take their turn at being on call for a week. Next level of response, if it exceeds those resources, is the general alarm. All of our personnel and all of our trucks. Now, the night duty personnel may respond as part of an alert crew call or as part of the general alarm. The full-time personnel or the officer in charge, that first person up on top, will be the acting incident commander in any of those instances unless relieved by additional staff when they arrive. And the last level of response is special operations. That's where you'll find members like our technical rescue team members. That's members of our department, approximately 6 to 8 people that have had specialized training. It may be in technical rescue, like I said, high-angle, confined space type of rescue, or it may be a regional response to a hazardous materials or weapons of mass destruction incident.
Chief Seevock, if you
Yes, sir.
go back to that last slide for a second.
This one?
Yeah. At what point would you invoke other resources that aren't available to you by the city's ownership, but maybe by the rural fire department's ownership? When would they be brought in, or what type of event would have to take place for them to be brought in?
It would depend on the type of incident. In an area where we have limited or no water supply, if we had the report of a actual structure fire in progress, we would immediately call for the resources of the rural fire department because their expertise is in moving water, large quantities of water. If we would need water for a structure fire beyond our hydrants and mains and infrastructure, we could call for them right away as we're responding. Otherwise, it could be, as an example, a structure fire, an apartment house fire that we had in Dickinson a few years ago, an exceptionally hot day. And it involved a lot of very physical work in removing sheetrock and removing insulation and so on and so forth. There came a point in time for the safety of our members, we asked for additional resources and manpower from the rural fire department. So it's a judgment call based on the type of incident and how that incident may be escalating. The types of incidents we respond to are represented by this graph. False alarms and false calls makes up the largest piece of that pie at 29%. Hazardous conditions with no fire, 22.9%. That could be a carbon monoxide response, or that could be an apartment house that's filled with smoke from something on the stove. There is no actual fire, yet there's still a hazard there, and we do respond and we'll ventilate the building to get the smoke out of the building. Fires making up 14.5%. And looking a little bit closer at fires, they're broken down for us like this. Actual building fires, 37%. Cooking, 11.4%. Those are, we categorize that, but cooking fires confined to the container. It didn't spread to the structure. Vehicle fires at 31.4, grass fires, 8.5. Dumpster or rubbish fires at 11.3. If you want to break down the building fires a bit more, that's 13 actual fires, is what that percentage represents. This graph compares 2009 incidents with 2010. 2010 is the green line, by month. Again, we did have 22 more responses, 22 more calls for service in 10 than in 9. Other than March, where you see quite an up and down, there really isn't a big discrepancy in how they track through the year, however. Response time is something that we talked about in our 2009 annual report. It was something that we stated that we were going to be watching very closely. Here again, NFPA, National Fire Protection Association guidelines give us our benchmark to help us judge the performance of our department. This first graph that you see will show that approximately 70% of the time we have someone on scene less than 9 minutes after we've received the call. Now that could be just that OIC, or that could be that OIC and 3 firefighters and a truck or something like that. So we're on scene 70% of the time less than 9 minutes. What the NFPA standard recommends, however, is for a structure fire. In other words, for a general alarm, we should be able to have 15 people on scene in 9 minutes or less 90% of the time. This next graph captures that data. That's something we had said we were going to try and do last year. Unfortunately, I have to say that of our responses that would fit that criteria, we only met the 9 minutes or less one time. Now, the factors that come into play there are travel distance for our volunteers. Keep in mind that with the type of department we have, we're asking our volunteers to respond from their places of business or from their homes at whatever hour it may be. They respond to the fire station, get dressed in their gear, get in the truck, and then respond. And what we're seeing, and what the graph bears out, is longer travel distances as our community spreads out, more congestion as population density increases. So here again, it's not a mandate. The NFPA ruling isn't a mandate, but rather, again, a benchmark, if you will, to help us gauge the performance of our department.
Chief, I have a quick question on that one.
Yes, sir.
Are those numbers based on fully staffed, fully manned, full-time stations or volunteer stations like ours?
NFPA 1710 recognizes the delivery of fire services to a community by a career department. These figures come from NFPA 1720, which recognizes the delivery of fire services by a volunteer or combination department, which is what we are.
And that's the numbers you're basing it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It's the numbers we're basing it on. One of the things that's become very important to us is a piece of equipment that's been in place in Dickinson for a long, long time. The traffic light emitters, or preemption devices that we call them. Each truck, each fire apparatus is equipped with a strobe that sends a signal to the traffic lights, certain traffic lights anyway. They read this signal and they turn the lights green. With our increased traffic and with the increased density we're trying to get through, those emitters have become extremely important. And I know that I've had conversations with Engineer Soren, and some equipment has been replaced and more equipment is slated to be replaced. It's very fortunate that we are ahead of the game in that respect, that we've got this in place. It's a matter of maintaining it and keeping it working. Because once we have the trucks en route, that becomes extremely important that we can do that with those traffic lights. Fire dollar loss is an area that we want to show you a decrease every year if we can. That would show that our fire inspection and public education program is effective. And here again, these are approximate figures. One of the reasons that we can't give you absolute, definite, hard and fast figures is because we don't consistently get the information in a timely manner from the insurance companies. Sometimes it's our best estimate, our best guess. Sometimes, as in the case with a recent fire, we received a report, initial report from the insurance company of $60,000 loss. Well, after year end, we have found out now that that's actually gone up by at least another $30,000. These are approximate figures, but it's as close as we can get. And we're hoping to capture that data better in the future. But in 2010, we had approximately $293,450 worth of property loss in the city of Dickinson. 2007, of course, is East End Auto Fire was there, the old Elks building. Per capita, this is based now on the last official census figures of 16,010. Fire protection cost per capita would be $25.55 based on those figures. Here again, I'm not going to say that's an exact science for us. What we do is we take our annual budget, including any capital expenditures for that year, we subtract the dollars that come back to the city of Dickinson through the insurance tax rebate check, and then we divide the population to come up with that rough figure. If we use suggested census figures of 18,500, it would drop that cost per capita to $22.11. Equipment replacement is represented by this graph. We have 3 units that are currently beyond their recommended years of replacement. Again, we're basing that recommendation on NFPA guidelines. Again, they're not mandates, they're strictly guidelines. As you'll see, a pumper or an engine's lifespan is suggested at 20 years. Now, that doesn't mean in communities such as Dickinson that they can't exceed that. And in our case, they do because of a very good maintenance program and because we do keep our runs down. Our fire prevention and public education program does keep us at 200 some runs a year, and hopefully less on a yearly basis. Rescue or an aerial is suggested at 30 years. The last engine that we replaced, which was 501 in 2009, well, the last engine we got, which is 501 in 2009, replaced a truck that was 34 years old. Now, what we were able to do with that is 502 was purchased with a lease purchase, 5-year lease purchase. That lease purchase ended, and we just continued on and bought 501, and I'm sure that those of you that were here for that remember that. I've had a discussion with Mr. Kessel that that would be a good way to continue looking at our equipment replacement. If we would proceed along those lines, the next truck to be replaced, which is 506, would be replaced when the lease purchase for 501 is done in another 4 full years, and that would make that truck 34 years old at the time that it should be replaced. It would also help us in the budgeting process to look at a schedule like that. Now, this graph represents apparatus only. It doesn't represent our other equipment, such as our air packs, hose, ladders, things like that. One of the things that you've heard me mention before is our air packs are going to be due for replacement at the end of 2012. And although we have a grant written for that, we haven't received a denial letter on that grant yet, but we haven't received a letter stating that we've received the award either. One of the things that, another thing I should say that this graph doesn't represent is the amount of time spent by department members in the maintenance of our equipment. Every piece of fire hose, every attack line is pressure tested once a year. All trucks with pumps are pump tested once a year. All ladders are tested by a third party, by an independent testing laboratory, as is the aerial on a yearly basis, overseen by our personnel. Fire hydrants, 300 to 400 fire hydrants per year by zone are tested by our personnel in cooperation with water utility maintenance staff also. In conclusion, the officers and members of the Dickinson Fire Department recognize the cooperation and the support of the City Commission and of the community, and we thank you for that. Are there any questions?
Chief Sivak, you've told us before, but tell us again, the air packs, the expected cost there is what? How much?
I believe it's going to be about $180,000.
Okay. And they need replacement at the end of 2012.
At the end of 2012, they've reached the end of their service life, and that's not a suggestion or a recommendation, that is a mandate.
We have to do that.
We have to do that.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? The report is very well done, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll mention that to staff. I couldn't get them to present it, but they did a great job in making it.
Just a comment, Mr. President, if I can.
Mr. Steiner.
Protection class of Dickinson is a protection class 4.
Yes.
Your protection classes for cities can be rated between 1 and 8. Okay, I believe that Bismarck, Minot, and those may be a 3.
They are.
Okay.
Well, I know Bismarck is.
Right, and the protection classes are based on your firefighters, the amount of firefighters, the amount of equipment, the gallonage, pressures, and so on. So, being a protection class 4 shows that the city fire department is doing an excellent job out there. But keeping the protection class number low saves on your homeowner's insurance and so on. Okay, so just to give you an idea of what that protection class 4 means, it's a very good rating for you guys.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Okay. We'll move to tab 6, Public Works. Mr. Soren.
Thank you, President Johnson. City Commissioners, the first item we have is the second reading of a rezoning request. It is Lot 7 and 8, Block 1 of Valentine subdivision, and the east half of Lot 1 of Wasepka's first subdivision. This is the subdivision about a mile south of town. It's adjacent to the electrical substation that is there, and the owners are requesting that the zoning be changed from R1 to general commercial because of the type of activity that is on the north side of it and directly to the west of the property. Planning and Zoning has looked at it and is recommending approval of their request.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Soren. You've heard the engineer's report. Any comments or questions by commissioners? Is there anybody from the public that would like to comment regarding this ordinance? No one from the public. Is there a motion regarding second and final reading of ordinance 1407?
Mr. President,
Mr. Steiner,
move to approve the second and final reading of ordinance number 1407.
is there a second?
I'll second.
We have the motion, the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Ullman?
Aye.
Mr. Lamblum?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. The motion carries. Mr. Soren, you continue, please.
Under the minutes or the reports, we do have planning and zoning in there. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. I think all of the items that we took action on at the last city commission meeting are referenced in there, and in planning and zoning's comments regarding that. I do have Board of Adjustment meeting minutes in there as well. Just to point out, there was a few variances granted. One was for the new micro hotel, variance to build a sign at 45 feet instead of the 25 feet. There was a canopy variance which required a 20-foot setback on Villard, which was approved to be within that 20 feet. I believe it was an 8-foot setback instead of 20. And then there was a house in a rural residential request where it requires a 40-foot front yard to go to 32 feet, and that one was approved as well. Be happy to answer any questions that you may have with regards to any of those as well. And then the code enforcement report is showing that we only have 2 permits to date, but I believe when the weather finally turns around, we're going to see that change drastically.
Mr. President, Mr. Shorten, when it comes to signage, it's always kind of a tentative decision. And when we're looking at the fact that we're using 45-foot poles for signage, do we see this as being catching momentum, and that we might have to get away from our 25-foot limit in the future?
I think in the area that this request was along the interstate, we may want to look at what would be an appropriate height requirement there. We seem to have granted a lot of variances there to the 45-foot height over the past several years. I think there's some feeling that interstate visibility is important in agreeing to that. So I think it's something that we may have to address.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I just have a question.
Sure.
Mr. Soren, would it be possible next month here or something to have you prepare a map showing projects that are coming during 2011? Both city, private, DOT, just to give us a sense for some of the water, sewer, street work that's going to be happening.
Yes, that certainly we can. That can certainly tie into several impact fee requests that I've got that I'm reviewing right now on my desk that's going to be coming in front of this commission as well. So we certainly can do that.
Okay. I'd be interested in that at least. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Soren, at the previous meeting, we had a request out on the east side of town, for water from Southwest Water, and I was thinking that that would be back in front of us. There was going to be a development agreement worked on. What's the status of that request?
We are working on that. We don't have the form finalized. That is something that unfortunately dropped to the back burner on my list. I'm looking back, trying to find out the exact form that we followed for the county, as well as I found another request from Stark Development, or Southwest Water, excuse me, to serve water in to sell raw water in the community. I'm trying to track back the status of that and exactly how we handled those situations as well. I think we'll certainly be able to work through that issue and make sure we can resolve those concerns for that property.
Anything else for the engineer? Hearing none, then we'll move to tab 7, City Administrator's Report.
Thank you, President Johnson. My first is the legislative biennium report. You have that in front of you. We did have achieved crossover last week, which means all the House bills that pass go to the Senate and vice versa. There is a multitude of bills that are still being tracked. I have highlighted the ones that are being supported by the 4 basic entities where I get information from, that being the League of Cities, the oil and gas producing counties, the Water Association, and the Insurance Reserve Fund. I would say that so far we're doing pretty well in terms of the bills we wanted to pass. The majority of them did. We did have some that we chose or would prefer not to have passed did. So we do have some work cut out for us now that crossover has occurred. We are using our government liaison to assist us. We have submitted about 10 different items, and if you want, I can give you those items that they're tracking for us at the legislative level here at the state. Just to continue with the government liaison services, they have penned a letter on our behalf to Senator Conrad. Senator Conrad sent us a letter requesting our desires or needs in the upcoming legislative session. Federally, we met with the government liaison staff, and they did pen that letter for us. And they've also assisting with a legislative newsletter. That's an electronic newsletter that goes out to all legislators, indicating all of the issues that are going on in the city of Dickinson, just for their information. So we are using them to a pretty good degree so far. There is, as I mentioned earlier this meeting, House Bill 1013 is taking testimony tomorrow morning at 8:30. That is the government, the governor's infrastructure bill that would increase the impact fund from $8 million to $100 million. That is a very important bill for us, and I have talked to several other cities, and they will have representation. If I can, I'm certainly intending to be there myself in the morning in support of that bill. Again, if you ever have bills that you are not represented here that you are aware of that we need to take a position on, please let me know, and we'll make sure that we do so. But otherwise, this would represent the list that we are tracking currently. I do have just one other item that I'd like to mention. We did receive, tomorrow is our next installment of the Recycling Committee meeting. We have had a tentative offer, I guess, by a local couple who is trying to create a recycling center in town. It is going to be an agenda item at our Recycling Committee meeting and may likely appear here before the Commission, asking us to take a position on certain items that we recycle and that other organizations recycle as well. So we're moving forward in that regard, and hopefully we'll provide you another update at an ensuing Commission meeting. So that would conclude my report unless there's any questions or comments about other items.
Thank you, Mr. Kessel. Are there any comments, questions for City Administrator? Okay, we'll move to tab 8, City Commission reports. I have one item that I'd like to bring up. Mr. Jackson and I, on the 14th, and Mr. Kessel have been invited to attend a hospital-related meeting, and so to be on the safe side, allow us to get there at a reasonable time, Mr. Jackson actually suggested to me that we set the meeting time for the meeting on the 14th to start at 4:30. So, Mr. Colling, can we do that? Well, that's first of all.
Mr. President, you mean the meeting on the 21st of March?
Yeah, did I say the 14th? Yes, 21st. I guess the 14th, I can show up anytime for that one, yeah. Okay.
You may change the date of the meeting or the time of the meeting. You just need to make sure that that's noticed and that media organizations are notified of the change of the time.
would the commission have any objection to, on that meeting, starting at 4:30 as opposed to 5:15?
That'd be fine.
Okay. Well, that, Mr. Kessel?
Could I make a recommendation that if we do that, that we don't start any timetable agenda items until 5:15 or after?
That would be fine with me. Maybe we get through your report right away. So, Mr. Colline, do we need a motion then to do this?
No, you don't need a motion, but will need to be noticed and
Okay.
made a part of the agenda.
Okay, so we'll, on the meeting on the March 21st, we'll start at 4:30 PM then. Okay. Are there any other items by city commissioners?
I have one item. Mr. Kessel, the conference in Minot coming up this weekend or maybe next week, impacts to infrastructure and the oil patch.
The Energy Symposium?
Is it part of the Energy Symposium? Are we going to be in attendance?
At this point, I'm not sure of any staff that are attending that event at this time. If commissioners would like to, we'd certainly be willing to sign you up and get you a room and such.
Well, here's my thought, and it might be a stretch here, but I'm wondering, it seems to me that attendance at that conference, the way I understand the agenda, would be really valuable for our new planner. Would maybe really give him a kickstart starting this. Now, I don't know if he's available. Would cost us some money, of course, to get him up here and all of that, and I don't know what the rest of you think, but it might really be worth the money in giving him some flavor of what's happening in western North Dakota and some of the issues that we face as a community, if he's available and interested. I realize he's not going to be on the payroll by then.
I could certainly make that offer, Commissioner Jackson.
It would cost us some money, so I don't know what the rest of you think about that.
No, I think it's an excellent suggestion.
I think it might have merit. I'm sending one of my staff people up there just for that.
So, but it's coming up real quick, isn't it?
It's very quick.
No. Okay. Any other comments by commissioners?
Mr. President,
Mr. Lamblum?
would you convey the contents of this letter to the members of the commission, please?
Do you want me to read this?
Please.
Okay, this letter is addressed to the Dickinson City Commission. It is from Mr. Lamblum. It says, "Gentlemen, we all live and work in a world of systems and structures that are governed by rules, procedures, and guiding principles. Unfortunately, there are times that they do not necessarily blend, complement, or agree with one another, or even make sense. Such is the case that faces me in my role as the executive director of a local quasi-public agency and in my position as a Dickinson City Commissioner. As a result, I am forced by a set of circumstances to make a choice of either continuing in my employment with the Roosevelt-Custer Regional Council for Development or to retain my seat on the City Commission. A perceived conflict of interest has arisen that involves a grant funding program that is partially administered by the Regional Council. Because of interest by particular groups within the city to access this program, it has been determined by the powers to be who have program responsibility at both the state and federal levels that I am unable to serve the public in both capacities. In facing this decision, I have to reflect on being able to provide for my personal livelihood as well as protecting the integrity and operations of my employer versus continuing to represent the citizens of this community with its governing responsibilities. Personally, eliminating either position is not an attractive option. But to measure my primary obligations at this point in my life, I find that it is still necessary for me to provide for the welfare of my family as well as maintain the viability of an organization into which I have invested 35 years of my life. Thus, I feel compelled to submit my resignation as a commissioner for the City of Dickinson, which is effective following the adjournment of tonight's commission meeting. I regret that I have not found any other course of action to remedy this situation. To the residents of Dickinson, I want to express my gratitude for the support that has been shown me in my short tenure as a member of this governing board. I would also like to convey to the public that I believe you are in very capable hands with the commission members you have on board under the competent leadership of our commission president. Likewise, I think it is important to acknowledge the contribution that our city employees and administrators are making for the betterment of our community. Thank you for the opportunity to serve the City of Dickinson. Yours, Rod Landblum, Dickinson City Commissioner. Well, Mr. Colling, before make some comments, I just ask, would it be proper for the commission to pass a motion then accepting this resignation?
That's correct, Mr. President. State law requires that a resignation like this is effective upon acceptance by the rest of the commission.
Okay.
So we would need to move a motion in that effect.
Okay. Well, the chair would entertain such a motion then.
We have a little discussion first.
Well, you can discuss before or after the motion's made. We do it either way, so.
Well, I'd like to understand this a little bit more. We've been aware of the situation with the funding on a couple projects, and I think those projects are going to happen in spite of the conflict. You know, there have been other sources. Has it gone beyond that?
From my understanding, is the parties have to have the opportunity to access the program. And action at the last meeting where they requested sponsorship took place. So the regional council has accepted those two applications. If the applications had not been coming forth, this would not be an issue at this time.
So the triggering event was the application, and it would be future applications that would...
Basically, at this time, yes. However, it does, as I conveyed before to the city attorney before I ran and after, based on the memorandum from the Assistant State's Attorney General, that there would be a possibility of a conflict of interest if anything like this ever arose. That situation has occurred.
Does it affect projects outside the city limits of Dickinson?
From my understanding, I don't think so, unless there's a different reading that the attorney, city attorney may have.
Mr. President, Commissioners, we did, Mr. Kessel and I and Mr. Landblum have a teleconference with some officials from the state, both from the Department of Commerce and from the Attorney General's office, to discuss the situation. And since it is the Department of Commerce at the state level that administers the program, they have to apply the federal rules of conflict of interest that are promulgated by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And what they conveyed to us in that teleconference was that this was a non-waivable conflict, that the Department of Commerce at the state level felt the obligation to make the Community Development Block Grant Program available to citizens within Dickinson, and that conflict, as the Department of Commerce put it, had to be remedied. That they were not willing to let the situation go with the conflict still in existence. We know that applies to the city of Dickinson. At the state level, they were not sure at this point whether that applied to other areas within the Roosevelt-Custer Regional Council district, but that was something that they were going to be researching and getting back to us.
So I think what I'm hearing is it's not just a matter of a certain project going without the funding. That the conflict is being perceived as a broader conflict.
That's correct, Commissioner Jackson, yes.
Not necessarily geographically, though? Is that what you're referring to?
Not necessarily geographically, but the Department of Commerce conveyed to us that these projects would not be eligible for community development block grants as long as the conflict existed. And the Department of Commerce, the state level, was not willing to allow those projects to be ineligible. They were committed to finding a way around that despite the conflict. And Mr. Landblum's resignation resolves the conflict and allows for those projects to be eligible for CBDG funding.
Other discussion? Well, I suppose you have two choices here. You can move a motion to accept it or move a motion to not accept the resignation. But
Mr. President,
Mr. Steiner.
I regretfully move that we accept the resignation of Commissioner. Trying to think of the last name now.
Landblum.
Kind of caught me off
And I
guard with
actually
this here, so I'm just kind of thinking here. That's my motion.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
I will second it in the same tone.
Okay. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. President,
Mr. Steiner.
it's unfortunate, but in a way there are certain levels where this comes into play. I've said it before that in a community our size, that people sitting on public boards are sometimes going to be faced with conflict of interest. I think each one of us has had a conflict of interest at some time in the past years. We're able to remedy that by stating the conflict of interest and then abstaining from the vote. However, as I mentioned, I think this is one level up from that, and I just want to thank Commissioner Landblum for his service. He has been an excellent commissioner, and regretfully, I hate to see him leave.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Other comments? Well, I think we all feel that way. Commissioner Landblum, even though your tenure has been short, you've come prepared for the meetings, and as have all the present commissioners, and I know as president of the commission, that always makes it a lot easier when you have commissioners who are prepared and participate in a constructive manner, and you've done that. Mr. Coley, one more item. When I call the roll now, do I still call Mr. Landblum's name on this vote?
Mr. Landblum would need to abstain from the vote.
You need to abstain. Okay.
Legally?
Okay. Well, then we'll go ahead. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Altman?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, and Mr. Landblum abstains. Best of luck to you.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Is there anybody from the public that wishes to comment on any issue? Hearing none, Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn then.
So
Did I
moved.
miss something, Mr. Kessel?
I was just curious if the commission would like to know what your options are in terms of the seat that Mr. Landblum would vacate.
Oh, I suppose that's a good point. We should, what are our options?
I believe Attorney Cooling is prepared to respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. President, Commissioners. In the event of a vacancy on the City Commission, state law does provide for the manner in which such a vacancy can be filled. The basic options that you have are to call for a special election to fill the seat or to appoint somebody to the position. In either case, you're required to wait at least 15 days before you do either of those actions. During that 15-day period, members of the public have the ability to circulate a petition in order to require a special election. The petition has to be filed within 15 days, has to have at least 5% of the voters in the last city election sign the petition. If such a petition is filed, then a special election would be required. You may also have the option of simply leaving the commission seat vacant. State law doesn't directly address whether that's an option. It's written in such a way to indicate that it may be an option, but it may not be. If that is a potential that you may want to pursue, what I would suggest is that we get an opinion from the Attorney General stating whether that indeed is an option for us to leave a commission seat vacant. But in either case, you have to wait at least 15 days before you make a decision one way or the other on that.
Mr. Colling, how many signatures are required based on the last election? Do you have those?
Yes, 5% of the total number of voters in the last city election would amount to 333 signatures.
Okay. And what's the ballpark cost of an election to fill it?
That I do not know.
Printing the ballots, having staff to be present during the election process are your major expenses. I mean, I would ballpark that to be between $5,000 and $10,000.
For a special election.
Mm-hmm.
And our next scheduled election would be roughly 15 months away.
And then if it goes to special election, does that person fill out Rod's term or the term between now and the next election? How does that work?
It would be between now and the next city election. It'd just be the remainder of the term.
Not his term, just
Sorry,
the,
I stated that wrongly. It would be the time from the election date to the next city election. So
Okay.
2012 would be the time when that position would be filled.
And then in 2012, whoever ran for that seat would be running for a 2-year term then. Okay. Well, I just assume that this would be on as an agenda item for discussion at the next meeting. That would still be within that 15-day period, so we couldn't take any action, but you'll have had time to kind of reflect on this, and so I think we should put it down for just discussion. And, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Tell us what our options are. Now, is there anything else? Okay, would there be a motion to adjourn?
I would make